My son thought leaving me to die in a foreign airport was his smartest financial move. He believed I was just a helpless old man who would fade away in the chaos of Mexico City. He didn't know I speak fluent Spanish. He didn't know I have resources he never saw. And he certainly didn't know that while he was flying back to Chicago to sell my house, I was already sitting in his kitchen, sharpening a steak knife, waiting to welcome him home. My name is Moses King. I am 71 years old. For the last decade, I have played the role of a quiet, retired widower. I let my son Darius and his wife Tiffany believe I was slow, perhaps a bit fragile. It was a mistake born of love. I wanted to believe they cared for me. Today, standing in the middle of Terminal 2 at Benito Juarez International Airport, that illusion shattered into 1,000 sharp pieces. The noise of the terminal was deafening. Thousands of travelers rushed past me, a sea of strangers speaking a language my son thought I did not understand. I stood near the entrance of Gate 64, my hand gripping the handle of my small carry-on bag until my knuckles turned white. I checked my watch for the 10th time. 45 minutes had passed. Darius and Tiffany had left me on this bench. "We are just going to grab some water bottles for the flight, Dad," Tiffany had said. Her smile was bright, too bright. It was the kind of smile a shark gives before it bites. Darius had refused to look me in the eye. He just nodded, tapped his phone, and followed his wife toward the duty-free shops. They never came back. The overhead speaker chimed. The announcement was in Spanish, then English. "United Airlines Flight 492 to Chicago O'Hare is now closed. Please proceed to the gate immediately." That was our flight. The blood in my veins turned to ice. I stood up, my knees protesting the sudden movement. I scanned the crowd. I looked for Darius's tall frame or Tiffany's blonde hair. Nothing. Just a wall of indifferent faces. I walked to the gate agent. The young woman looked at me with professional detachment. I asked if Darius King and Tiffany King had boarded. She typed on her keyboard, "Yes, sir. They boarded 20 minutes ago. The doors are closed. The plane is pushing back." I did not scream. I did not cry. I simply nodded and stepped away from the counter. The betrayal hit me physically like a blow to the chest. My own son had abandoned me in a foreign country. He had timed it perfectly. He waited until I was through security, tired and disoriented, and then he left me behind like unwanted luggage. I sat back down on the hard metal bench. I needed to think. I reached for my carry-on bag to get my phone. I unzipped the main compartment. It was empty. My heart skipped a beat. I dug frantically into the side pockets. My passport was gone. My wallet with my credit cards and cash was gone. But the most terrifying realization came a second later. My heart medication, the nitroglycerin pills I needed to take daily, was gone. They had stripped me clean. They had left me with nothing but the clothes on my back and a half-empty bottle of water. I turned the bag upside down. A single piece of crumpled notebook paper fell out. I picked it up. It was Tiffany's handwriting. Sharp, angular letters that I had seen on so many birthday cards. The note was short. "Dad, please stay here. The airport police will help you find a nice nursing home in Mexico. It is cheaper here. Don't try to come home. We are selling the house. It is for the best." For the best. The words echoed in my mind. A sharp pain pierced my chest, radiating down my left arm. My breath came in short, ragged gasps. It was not just panic. It was my heart reacting to the shock. I clutched my chest. The terminal spun around me. Black spots danced in my vision. I could feel the onset of a cardiac event. I needed my pills, the pills Darius had stolen. I closed my eyes. I thought of Beatrice, my late wife. I thought of the years I spent building a life in Chicago. I thought of the sacrifices I made to send Darius to private schools, to fund his failed businesses, to keep him out of trouble. He was killing me. He was literally killing me to get his hands on a house I had worked 40 years to buy. No. I opened my eyes. The pain was still there, but a cold rage began to replace the panic. I was Moses King. I had managed logistics for military operations in zones far more hostile than a Mexico City airport. I had survived riots, supply chain collapses, and corporate wars. I was not going to die on a plastic bench because my son was a greedy coward. I forced my breathing to slow down. Inhale for 4 seconds, hold for 4, exhale for 4. The military box breathing technique kicked in instinctively. I stood up slowly. I ignored the stares of the passers-by who saw an abandoned old man clutching his chest. I walked to the nearest restroom. Inside, I splashed cold water on my face. I looked at my reflection in the dirty mirror. The eyes staring back were not the eyes of a victim. They were the eyes of a man who had just declared war. I patted down my jacket. Darius had been thorough, but he was arrogant. He didn't check my person. He only checked the bag. I rolled up my left sleeve. Tucked inside the hidden cuff of my custom-made shirt was a single $100 bill and a small slip of paper with a phone number. I always carried emergency backups. Old habits die hard. I walked out of the restroom and found a row of payphones near the exit. I inserted the coins I had found in my pocket change from a coffee I bought earlier. I dialed the number. It rang once, twice. A gruff voice answered. "Yeah." "Mateo," I said. My voice was steady, devoid of the fear that had gripped me minutes ago. "It is Moses. I am at Benito Juarez. Code Black." There was a pause on the other end. Mateo did not ask silly questions. He did not ask how I was or why I was calling. We had served together. We knew that questions wasted time. "Location," Mateo asked. "Terminal 2 near Gate 64. I have no ID, no cards, no meds. Darius took everything. He is on a flight back to Chicago right now to sell my house." I heard the sound of keys jingling on the other end. "I am 20 minutes out," Mateo said. "Do not talk to the uniformed police yet. Stay in the blind spot near the maintenance lockers. I will bring the kit." I hung up the phone. I watched the digital board change. Flight 492 to Chicago departed. Darius and Tiffany were in the air, probably drinking champagne, toasting to their freedom and their inheritance. They thought the game was over. They thought they had won. I sat on a bench in the shadows watching the flow of people. The pain in my chest had subsided to a dull ache controlled by sheer willpower. I was not a confused old man lost in a foreign land. I was a predator waiting for extraction. My son had made the first move. It was a bold one, but he had forgotten the first rule of engagement. Never leave an enemy alive behind you, especially not one who taught you everything you know about survival. I checked the time. 19 minutes. When I get back to Chicago, Darius is going to wish he had pushed me out of the plane door instead of leaving me here. The real lesson was about to begin. 30,000 feet above me, my son is reclining in a first-class seat. I can picture the scene with crystalline clarity. Darius is not mourning the father he just abandoned. He is signaling the flight attendant for another glass of champagne. The crystal flute clinks against the tray table. It is the sound of celebration. Beside him, Tiffany is scrolling through photos on her phone. She is deleting every picture of me. She is erasing the evidence of my existence from their digital lives. They look at each other and smile. It is the smile of two people who believe they have just committed the perfect crime. No blood, no weapon. Just an old man left to fade away in a foreign system. They are toasting to their freedom. They are clinking glasses to the inheritance they believe is already theirs. Tiffany is likely squeezing his hand, telling him to relax. She is whispering that by the time the Mexican authorities find me, I will be a John Doe in a charity ward. They think the hard part is over. They believe the only thing left to do is land in Chicago and cash the check. They are wrong. The hard part has not even begun. They are celebrating a victory in a war they do not even realize has started. Darius did not act out of hatred alone. He acted out of terror. My son is a weak man who made deals with dangerous people. He owes $200,000 to loan sharks who do not send collection letters. They send men with baseball bats. He needed money fast. He needed a miracle. My house in the historic district of Chicago was that miracle. It is worth $1.5 million. It is his salvation. But I refused to sell. I refused to let him liquidate my legacy to cover his gambling debts and failed crypto investments. So Tiffany took control. She is the architect of this betrayal. Before we left, she placed a document in front of me. It was a limited power of attorney. She said it was just for emergencies while we traveled. It was a lie. It was a weapon. Now she has that document in her carry-on. She has the keys to my front door in her purse. She has already drafted the real estate listing. She needs to sell that house in 48 hours or the men with the bats will come for Darius. They made a calculation. My life for his debt. It was a simple equation to them. They view me as an expired asset, a liability that needed to be written off. But they made a critical error. They assumed I was the helpless victim in their narrative. They forgot that the house they are so eager to sell holds secrets of its own. I stood up from the bench and smoothed my jacket. The chest pain was now a cold, manageable knot. I walked straight to the airport police station. The officer at the front desk looked up. He saw an elderly black man in a suit. He expected confusion. He expected a plea for help in broken English. He prepared his standard speech about the U.S. Embassy. I leaned over the counter. I looked him dead in the eye. I spoke to him in flawless, rapid-fire Spanish. The Mexico City dialect rolled off my tongue as easily as it did 30 years ago. I did not tell him my son abandoned me. If I reported abandonment, they would place me in the social services system. I would be stuck in a shelter for weeks while bureaucrats filed paperwork. I did not have weeks. I had hours. So I lied. I told the officer I was robbed at gunpoint outside the terminal. I told him they took my passport and my wallet. A robbery is a priority crime. A robbery gets you an emergency travel document in 60 minutes. The officer's eyes went wide. He straightened his posture. He typed furiously. He printed the document. I signed it without hesitation. I walked out of the terminal and stood on the curb. The smog of the city hit my face. A battered Ford pickup truck pulled up to the curb. The engine rattled. The window rolled down. Mateo looked older. His face was a map of deep lines and scars, but his eyes were the same steel I remembered from our days in the unit. He did not smile. He simply unlocked the door. I climbed in. We did not hug. We did not exchange pleasantries. We were soldiers engaging in a mission. I handed him the watch. He handed me the envelope. I was going home. I sat in the passenger seat of Mateo's truck and unclasped the heavy steel band from my wrist. The Rolex Submariner was more than a timepiece. It was a relic from a life I had buried. My late wife Beatrice had given it to me 40 years ago when I returned from my first tour overseas. It was the only thing of value Darius had not managed to steal because I never took it off. The weight of it in my hand felt like a physical piece of my soul. I looked at the faded dial and the scratched bezel. Every scratch told a story of survival. Now it had one final purpose. I handed it to Mateo. He did not haggle. He knew what it was worth. He knew what I needed. He reached into the glove compartment and pulled out a thick envelope. Inside was a stack of U.S. currency and a printed boarding pass. It was a first-class ticket on the next direct flight to Chicago. It was leaving in 90 minutes. This was the only way to beat them. Darius and Tiffany were flying commercial on a budget airline with a layover in Houston. They were celebrating and taking their time. I was flying direct. I was flying with the urgency of a man who had already died and come back to life. I looked at Mateo one last time. I told him I would buy the watch back when the war was over. He nodded and gunned the engine. He dropped me at the VIP entrance. I did not look back. I walked through security with the focus of a predator. I boarded the plane and refused the champagne the flight attendant offered. I needed a clear head. I stared out the window as Mexico City disappeared beneath the clouds. My son had sold me out for a quick payday. He traded his father for a clearance sale on a house he did not own. He thought he had all the time in the world. He was wrong. The clock was ticking, and I was the one winding it. The time zones were my ally. I landed at O'Hare International Airport 2 hours before Darius and Tiffany were scheduled to touch down. The cold Chicago wind hit my face as I stepped out of the terminal. It was a stark contrast to the heat of Mexico, but it felt like justice. I did not take a taxi. I hired a private car service. I needed speed and reliability. We tore down the highway toward the historic district. My phone was still off. I was a ghost. When the car pulled up in front of my brownstone, the street was quiet. The house stood tall and imposing against the gray sky. It was a beautiful structure built of brick and stone worth every cent of the $1.5 million Darius coveted. I walked up the steps. I did not reach for my keys because I knew Tiffany had them in her purse. I reached under the loose brick on the third step. It was a hiding spot older than Darius. My fingers brushed the cold metal of the emergency key. I slid it into the lock. The tumblers clicked. The door swung open. I stepped inside. The air in the hallway was stale. It smelled of betrayal. I saw the outline in the dust where my favorite vase used to be. They had already started selling things before the trip. They had been liquidating my life piece by piece while smiling in my face. I walked through the living room. It felt empty, not because furniture was missing, but because the love that had built this home had been sucked out of it. I checked the security panel. It was disarmed. They had left it off so the real estate agent could get in. Arrogance. Pure arrogance. They were so sure I would never return that they left the front gate wide open. I stood in the center of my living room and checked my new watch. I had 90 minutes before they arrived. It was enough. I did not sit down to mourn. I went straight to the kitchen and grabbed the landline. I dialed the number for a security specialist I had worked with during my years in logistics. He was expensive, but he was fast. I told him I needed a complete system overhaul immediately. I told him money was no object. 30 minutes later, a van pulled up. The technician did not ask why an old man in a suit needed military-grade biometrics installed on a residential door. He just went to work. We replaced the standard deadbolts with fingerprint scanners. We changed the keypad codes. We installed a camera that fed directly to my new burner phone. When he was finished, my house was no longer a home. It was a fortress. Darius could have 1,000 keys in his pocket. None of them would turn these locks. I paid the technician in cash from the envelope Mateo gave me. Once he left, I locked the door. I heard the heavy steel bolts slide into place with a satisfying thud. I was safe, but safety was not the goal. Punishment was the goal. I walked into the kitchen. I opened the refrigerator. It was stocked with premium ingredients Darius had bought for his victory dinner. He had planned to come home and cook a celebration meal after leaving me to rot. I took out 2 thick ribeye steaks. I found the bottle of expensive Cabernet he had been saving. I lit the stove. The smell of searing meat and garlic began to fill the house. It was a domestic scent, a comforting scent. It was the smell of a father cooking for his family. But tonight it was psychological warfare. I set the table for 3. I poured the wine. I put on my favorite apron over my suit. I stood by the kitchen island sharpening the carving knife. The rhythmic sound of steel against steel echoed in the silence. I waited. I listened for the sound of a taxi pulling up. I imagined the look on their faces when they tried to put their key in the lock. I imagined the terror when they realized the house was occupied. I was not just cooking dinner. I was preparing a lesson they would never survive. The arrival of my son and his wife was not the triumphant return of conquering heroes, but the noisy intrusion of scavengers. I watched them through the feed of my newly installed security camera. The taxi pulled up to the curb and they spilled out onto the pavement. Darius looked disheveled. His shirt was untucked and he dragged 2 heavy suitcases up the stone steps with the exaggerated exhaustion of a man who has never done a day of physical labor in his life. Tiffany marched ahead of him, tapping furiously on her phone. She did not look at the house with affection. She looked at it like a butcher looks at a carcass calculating the choicest cuts. I stood in the shadows of the kitchen and waited. I had remotely disengaged the new locking mechanism just seconds before they reached the door. I wanted them inside. I wanted them to feel safe before the floor dropped out from under them. I heard the heavy click of the latch. The door swung open. They stumbled into the foyer, dropping their bags with a careless thud that echoed through the hallway. The silence of the house was instantly shattered by their voices. They did not call out for me. They did not check to see if the house was secure. They assumed it was empty because they had ensured it would be empty. Darius kicked the door shut behind him. I listened as he walked into the living room, his footsteps heavy on the hardwood floors I had polished by hand for 30 years. He was already spending the money he thought he had made. I heard him tapping on the walls. He was talking about knocking down the partition between the living room and the study. He wanted to create an open concept flow. He said it would increase the asking price by $50,000. Tiffany's voice drifted in from the hallway, sharp and critical. She complained about the smell of old books and lemon oil. She said the whole place needed to be gutted. She talked about ripping out the original crown molding because it looked dated. She wanted to paint the mahogany wainscoting white. Every word was a violation. They were dissecting my life, stripping the flesh from the bones of my history. They spoke of my home as if it were a derelict property they had picked up at auction, not the sanctuary where I had raised my son. I gripped the handle of the carving knife tighter. The steel felt cool and grounding against my palm. They were so confident, so utterly sure of their victory. They moved through my home with the arrogance of thieves who believe the police have been paid off. The atmosphere shifted when they moved toward the back of the house. They were heading for the kitchen. This was the staging ground for their celebration. I stepped back into the pantry, leaving the door cracked just enough to see. Tiffany walked in first. She looked around the kitchen with a sneer curling her lip. She remarked that the appliances would all have to go. She said stainless steel was the minimum standard for the buyers they were targeting. Darius followed her, loosening his tie. He told her to grab the champagne they had bought before the trip. He said he wanted to toast to the future before they called the real estate agent. He sounded giddy. He sounded like a child who had gotten away with breaking a window. Tiffany walked to the refrigerator. She reached for the handle. I held my breath. This was the first crack in their reality. She pulled the door open. The light from inside the fridge spilled out, illuminating her face. She froze. Her hand hovered in midair. She was staring at shelves stocked with fresh produce. There were cartons of milk with expiration dates weeks in the future. There were vibrant green vegetables, crisp and washed. There was a container of fresh salsa I had bought at the local market just hours ago. It was not the refrigerator of a man who had been gone for days. It was not the refrigerator of a house waiting to be sold. It was the refrigerator of a home that was very much alive. I saw the confusion ripple across her features. She blinked rapidly as if trying to clear a hallucination. She stepped back and looked at Darius. Her voice trembled slightly when she spoke. She asked him if he had cleared out the fridge before they left. Darius laughed. He was pouring himself a glass of water from the tap, oblivious to the shift in the room. He told her he had not touched a thing. He said the cleaning crew would handle it all once the house was listed. Tiffany looked back at the open fridge. She reached out and touched a carton of milk. It was cold. It was real. Panic began to seep into her expression. She looked around the kitchen, scanning the countertops. She saw the coffee maker. The pot was warm. A thin wisp of steam curled from the spout. "Someone is here," she whispered the words. It was not a question. It was a terrified realization. She grabbed Darius's arm, digging her nails into his sleeve. She pointed at the fridge. She pointed at the coffee pot. Darius frowned. He looked at the food. He looked at the steam. His face went slack. The arrogance drained out of him, leaving only the hollow fear of a coward. He backed away toward the island, his eyes darting to the back door. They thought they were alone. They thought they were the masters of this domain. Now they knew they were trespassing. The silence in the kitchen stretched tight like a rubber band about to snap. They stood frozen, waiting for a noise, waiting for a sign, waiting for the ghost they had created to manifest. I stepped out of the pantry. The movement was smooth and deliberate. I walked into the pool of light cast by the overhead fixture. I was wearing my favorite butcher's apron over my suit. In my right hand, I held the carving knife, the blade gleaming under the kitchen lights. In my left hand, I held a crystal glass of the vintage Cabernet Darius had been saving for this very moment. I took a sip. The wine was excellent. I savored the taste, letting the silence build. Darius turned. He saw me. His eyes bulged in his head. His mouth opened, but no sound came out. He looked like a man watching his own executioner walk through the door. He stumbled back, hitting his hip against the granite counter. The glass of water he was holding slipped from his fingers and shattered on the floor. The sound was explosive in the quiet room. Tiffany spun around. When she saw me, she did not just gasp. She screamed. It was a high, piercing sound of pure, primal terror. She looked at me as if I were a corpse that had crawled out of the grave to drag her back down with me. I smiled. It was not a warm smile. It was the smile I used to wear when negotiating contracts in war zones. It was the smile that said, "I hold all the cards and you have nothing. Welcome home, children." My voice was steady and deep, filling the room without effort. I gestured with the knife point toward the table I had set. "You are just in time for dinner. I hope you like your steak rare. I find it retains more flavor that way." Darius was shaking. His knees buckled, and he had to grip the counter to stay upright. He looked from me to the knife and back to my face. He could not process what he was seeing. His brain was trying to reconcile the image of the father he left at a gate in Mexico with the man standing in his kitchen holding a weapon. "Dad," he choked out the word. It sounded like a plea for mercy. "How? We left you." I took another step forward. The sound of my dress shoes on the tile was sharp and authoritative. "You did leave me," I agreed calmly. "But I decided to catch an earlier flight. I hate layovers, and I certainly hate missing dinner in my own house." Tiffany pressed her back against the refrigerator. She was hyperventilating. Her eyes were fixed on the knife. She was not looking at a father-in-law anymore. She was looking at a threat. She was looking at a reckoning. The smell of the searing meat I had on the stove behind me filled the air, mixing with the metallic scent of their fear. The ghost was real, and he was hungry. The shock on Tiffany's face vanished instantly, replaced by a mask of aggressive concern. She recovered with the speed of a seasoned manipulator. She dropped her bags and rushed across the kitchen, ignoring the knife I had placed on the counter. She threw her arms around me, enveloping me in a cloud of expensive perfume and false affection. She sobbed loudly against my shoulder. "Oh, Dad, thank God you are here. We were terrified. We looked everywhere for you at the airport." I stood rigid in her embrace. I let her perform. She pulled back and cupped my face in her hands, her eyes wide and glistening with crocodile tears. "Why did you wander off?" she demanded, her voice pitching high with accusation disguised as relief. "We told you to wait on the bench. We came back with the water and you were gone. We paged you for an hour. We almost missed our flight searching for you. We only boarded because security told us you must have left the terminal." It was a masterful pivot. In seconds, she had rewritten the narrative. I was no longer the victim of a calculated abandonment. I was the confused, senile old man who had wandered away and caused his loving children unnecessary panic. She was gaslighting me, attempting to plant seeds of doubt in my own mind and attempting to signal Darius on how to play this hand. Darius caught the pass immediately. He wiped the sweat from his upper lip and nodded vigorously, his fear shifting into feigned exasperation. "Yeah, Dad," he stammered, his voice gaining strength. "You cannot just walk away like that. You know your memory is not what it used to be. We were sick with worry. We thought you had been kidnapped. I decided to give them the rope they needed to hang themselves." I slumped my shoulders and let my face go slack, erasing the sharp lines of the predator I had been moments ago. I looked down at the floor, shaking my head slowly. I blinked rapidly as if trying to clear a fog from my mind. "I am sorry," I mumbled, my voice raspy and weak. I got confused. I thought I heard them call our flight. I walked to the gate, but I could not find you. I must have gotten turned around. A nice man helped me get a ticket. I just wanted to come home. I was scared. Tiffany exhaled a long breath of triumph. She patted my arm with condescending gentleness. "It is okay, Dad. You are home now. That is all that matters. But we are going to have to keep a closer eye on you from now on. We cannot have you wandering off again." The threat was implicit. I would be a prisoner in my own home under the guise of care. Darius relaxed completely. The color returned to his face. He picked up the suitcases again, regaining his swagger now that he believed he was back in control. "Well, let us get these bags upstairs," he said. "It has been a long day. I need a drink." He turned toward the front door, intending to bring in the rest of their luggage. He pulled his keyring from his pocket, the jingle of metal loud in the quiet house. I watched him silently. He slid his key into the lock cylinder. It stopped halfway. He frowned. He wiggled it, trying to force it deeper. It would not turn. He pulled it out, looked at it, and shoved it back in, twisting it hard. Metal scraped against hardened steel. "What is wrong with this thing?" Darius muttered. He rattled the door handle. It was locked tight. The biometric scanner I had installed glowed with a soft red ring of denial. I took a sip of my wine, watching him struggle. "Oh, I forgot to tell you," I said casually, my voice still sounding frail. "I had a locksmith come by right after I got home. The old lock was feeling loose. I was worried about burglars. This new one uses fingerprints. It is very high-tech." Darius froze. He stared at the lock. He realized in that moment that his key, the symbol of his access and ownership, was now nothing more than a useless piece of scrap metal. He turned to look at me. "You changed the locks," he asked, his voice rising. "Without asking us." I shrugged, innocent and helpless. I just wanted to be safe, son. You know how the neighborhood is changing. I will program your prints later, maybe tomorrow. Darius stood by the door, defeated. He realized he was locked inside with me and he had no way to control the environment. He walked back into the kitchen, his movements heavy. He reached for the bottle of wine I had opened and poured himself a glass, his hand shaking so much he spilled red drops on the counter. I watched him wipe them up with his sleeve. Speaking of safety, I said, my tone conversational. It is a good thing I upgraded the security. When I got home, I found something very disturbing. Tiffany looked up sharply from her phone. What do you mean? She asked. I walked over to the oven and checked the steaks. They were searing perfectly. Well, I went into my study to check my papers, I said, and I noticed the floor safe was open. Someone had been digging through it. Papers were scattered everywhere. Darius dropped his glass. It hit the floor and shattered just like the water glass before it. Red wine splattered across his trousers like blood. He stared at me with pure horror. He knew exactly who had opened the safe. He had spent 3 hours rifling through it the night before our trip looking for deeds and bonds. He thought he had closed it, but in his greed he must have been careless. I continued ignoring his mess. It was very frightening. I thought a burglar might still be in the house, so I called the police immediately. They came by just before you arrived. They dusted the whole safe for fingerprints. They said since it was a high-value break-in, they would run the prints through the national database tonight. They seemed very confident they would catch the thief. Darius looked like he was going to vomit. His fingerprints were all over that safe. He had a record from a juvenile assault charge 20 years ago. He was in the system. The police came. Tiffany whispered, her face pale. Yes, I said, flipping the stakes. They took a full report. I told them I suspected it was someone who had a key because there was no forced entry. That is another reason I changed the locks. We cannot be too careful, can we? Darius gripped the edge of the counter. He was hyperventilating. He looked at Tiffany pleadingly. He knew that when the police ran those prints, they would match him, and he knew that explaining why he was looting his father's safe before abandoning him in Mexico would be a conversation he could not survive. The morning sun filtered through the heavy curtains of my living room, but it brought no warmth to the house. I sat in my leather armchair facing the front window, watching the street like a sentry on guard duty. The house was silent, but it was a heavy, suffocating silence. Upstairs, Darius and Tiffany were hiding. I had heard them pacing the floorboards all night, whispering in frantic tones. They were trapped in the bedroom, terrified of the police investigation I had fabricated and terrified of the man sitting downstairs. They knew they had to sell the house to pay off the debts that were strangling them, but they also knew they could not move me. They were waiting for a miracle. Instead, they got a mercenary. At exactly 8 o'clock, a sleek silver luxury sedan turned onto our quiet street. It moved with an aggressive speed that seemed out of place among the family SUVs and sedans of my neighbors. The car pulled up directly in front of my walkway, blocking the driveway completely. It was an arrogant parking job, the kind that said the driver owned the pavement beneath his tires. The door opened and a man stepped out. I recognized him immediately from the dossier I had compiled weeks ago. This was Brad. He was a real estate shark who operated on the fringes of the law, specializing in distress sales and quick flips. He was also the man Tiffany had been meeting for lunch twice a week while Darius was supposedly at work. He adjusted his suit jacket, which looked expensive but fit him poorly around the shoulders. He wore dark sunglasses despite the overcast sky. He carried a leather portfolio tucked under his arm like a weapon. He marched up the walkway, his shoes clicking loudly on the stone. He did not look at the garden I had tended for 20 years. He looked only at the front door, seeing it as an obstacle to his commission. He jabbed the doorbell button with a thick finger. He did not ring it once. He held it down, letting the chime echo continuously through the house. It was a summon. He was here to collect his prize. He had the deposit money ready, and he expected the house to be empty and the deed to be signed. He had no idea the game had changed. I waited for the bell to stop ringing before I stood up. I moved slowly, deliberately. I smoothed the front of my cardigan. I wanted to look harmless. I wanted him to underestimate me just like everyone else. I walked to the door and unlocked the heavy deadbolt I had installed the day before. The mechanical click of the lock disengaging was loud and precise. I opened the door. Brad was already checking his watch, tapping his foot impatiently on my welcome mat. He looked up, expecting to see Darius or perhaps Tiffany. When he saw me, his expression shifted from impatience to annoyance. He did not see the owner of the house. He saw an elderly black man in comfortable house clothes, and he made an immediate assumption. He assumed I was the help. He pushed his sunglasses up onto his forehead and looked down his nose at me. "Is Darius up yet?" he demanded without a greeting. "Tell him Brad is here with the paperwork. We need to get this done before noon, and get me a coffee while you're at it. Black. No sugar." He tried to step past me into the foyer, expecting me to move aside like a servant. I did not flinch. I stood in the center of the doorway, my feet planted shoulder-width apart, occupying the space with a solidity he did not expect. I blocked his path completely. "I am afraid Darius is indisposed," I said, my voice calm and level. "And I do not work here." Brad blinked, confused by my tone and my refusal to yield. He looked me up and down, his sneer deepening as he assessed my value. "Then who are you?" he asked with a scoff. "The gardener." "Look, old man, I do not have time for games. I have a buyer waiting with a $50,000 cashier's check. Get out of my way or I will have you fired." He reached out to shove past me, his hand aiming for my shoulder. Before he could make contact, I heard the thundering of footsteps on the stairs behind me. Darius came sprinting down the hallway. He looked frantic, his eyes wild with panic. He was wearing the same wrinkled clothes from yesterday, his hair standing up in disarray. "Brad, wait!" Darius shouted, skidding to a halt on the hardwood floor. "Don't come in!" "Not yet." Brad stopped, his hand hovering inches from my chest. He looked at Darius, then back at me. "What is going on, Darius?" he asked, his voice dripping with irritation. "Who is this guy? Why is he blocking the door? I thought you said the house was empty." Darius tried to reach around me to grab my arm, attempting to pull me back into the house. "Dad, please just go to the kitchen," he begged, his voice cracking. "Brad is a friend. We have business to discuss. It does not concern you." I shook off his hand with a sharp, disciplined movement that made Darius recoil. "I am not going anywhere," I said, my voice hardening. "And this is not your house to invite people into." Brad looked from Darius to me, and the pieces finally clicked into place. His face went slack with shock, then flushed red with anger. "This is him," he said, pointing an accusing finger at me. "This is the father, the one who was supposed to be gone. You told me he was in Mexico, Darius. You told me he was not coming back. You told me the house was yours," Darius stammered, wiping sweat from his forehead with a shaking hand. "He came back, Brad. It is complicated. There was a mix-up at the airport. We just need a few more days to sort it out. We can still do the deal." Brad laughed, a harsh barking sound that lacked any humor. "A few days," he spat. "I have investors breathing down my neck. I have money on the table. We are signing this contract today or the deal is dead." He opened his portfolio and pulled out a thick stack of legal documents. "Here, sign it now. Use the power of attorney you showed me. We can evict him later once the deed is recorded. Just get the signature on the page." I reached into the inside pocket of my cardigan. I pulled out a single sheet of crisp white paper. It was a fax I had received from my attorney just 10 minutes before Brad arrived. I unfolded it slowly, letting the tension build. I held it up for Brad to see. It was a formal revocation of all powers of attorney, notarized and filed with the county clerk that morning. The seal was fresh and undeniable. "This document is worthless," I said, my voice cutting through their panic like a knife. "I revoked my son's authority yesterday morning, the moment I landed in Chicago. Any contract he signs is fraud. Any money you take from him is theft. And since you are a licensed broker, Brad, you know that knowingly participating in a fraudulent sale will cost you your license and likely your freedom." Brad snatched the paper from my hand. He read it, his eyes scanning the legal jargon. His face turned a dangerous shade of purple. He looked at Darius with pure, unadulterated hatred. "You lied to me," he hissed. "You said you had control. You took the deposit money from the investors and gave it to your bookie, didn't you? You do not even have the authority to sell a doghouse." Darius shrank back against the wall. "Brad, I can fix this," he pleaded. "You cannot fix anything," Brad shouted, slamming his portfolio shut. "I am going to sue you, Darius. I am going to take everything you have left, and then I am going to have you thrown in jail for fraud. Do not ever call me again." He turned on his heel and stormed down the steps, getting into his car and peeling away from the curb. Darius stood in the open doorway watching his salvation drive away, knowing that the loan sharks would be the next ones to knock, and they would not be bringing paperwork. The silence in my house was not peaceful. It was heavy and pressurized like the air in a submarine that had gone too deep. I sat in my armchair by the window reading a book on military history while Darius paced the length of the hallway. He had worn a track into my Persian rug over the last 6 hours. Every time a car passed outside, he flinched. He was waiting for the consequences of his choices to arrive. At exactly 6 in the evening, his phone began to ring. It was a harsh, jarring sound that made him jump. He looked at the screen and his face drained of all color. He let it ring 4 times before he answered. His hands were shaking so badly he hit the speakerphone button by mistake. The voice that filled my living room was not human. It was a growl. It sounded like gravel grinding against steel. The man on the other end did not introduce himself. He did not ask how Darius was doing. He simply delivered a forecast. "You are out of time, Darius." My son began to stammer. He pleaded. He begged. He told the voice that the sale was complicated, but the money was coming. He used words like liquidity and asset freeze, trying to sound like a businessman instead of a degenerate gambler. The voice cut him off. "We do not care about your assets. We care about our principal. You have 24 hours. If we do not have $200,000 in cash by tomorrow night, we are going to take a finger. We will start with the pinky on your left hand. Then we will take the ring finger. Then the hand itself. Do you understand?" Darius sank to his knees. Tears were streaming down his face. He whispered yes. The line went dead. The threat hung in the air, toxic and absolute. Tiffany was sitting on the sofa, hugging a throw pillow to her chest. She did not go to him. She did not comfort him. She looked at him with a mixture of disgust and terror. She was realizing that her husband was not just a failure. He was a liability. I turned a page in my book. The sound was loud in the quiet room. I did not offer to help. I did not offer the money I had sitting in my offshore accounts. Pain is the only teacher arrogant men listen to. Darius needed to learn that debts are real and that borrowing money from wolves always ends in blood. I decided it was time for dinner. I walked into the kitchen and began to serve the roast chicken I had prepared. It was a simple meal, wholesome and domestic. I set the table with the same precision I used to coordinate supply drops. 3 plates, 3 glasses, napkins folded into triangles. I called them to the table. They came not because they were hungry, but because they had nowhere else to go. The smell of the roasted meat seemed to make them nauseous. Darius stared at his plate, his hands trembling too much to hold a fork. Tiffany sat rigid, her eyes fixed on the wall. I cut a piece of chicken and ate it. It was perfectly cooked. "Why aren't you eating?" I asked, my voice calm and conversational. "You need your strength. It sounds like tomorrow is going to be a difficult day for you, Darius." That was the spark that ignited the fuel. Tiffany snapped. The mask of the composed social climber shattered completely. She stood up so abruptly her chair tipped over backward and crashed onto the floor. She grabbed the edge of her plate and hurled it across the room. It smashed against the wall, leaving a stain of gravy and grease on the wallpaper my late wife had chosen. "Stop it!" she screamed. Her face was twisted into a mask of pure hatred. "Stop acting like this is normal. Stop eating. Stop breathing. Why won't you just die?" She leaned over the table, bracing her hands on the wood. She looked like a banshee. "You were supposed to be gone," she hissed. "We left you in Mexico with nothing. You are old. You have a heart condition. You were supposed to have a heart attack and die in a gutter so we could save ourselves. Why are you so selfish? Why do you have to keep living when your son is about to be mutilated?" She was not crying. She was raging. She poured out every ounce of venom she had been storing for 10 years. She called me a useless relic. She called me a burden. She said I was hoarding wealth I did not deserve while they suffered. She admitted everything. She admitted that my death was the line item in their budget that would balance their books. She screamed that I was the villain for surviving their attempt to murder me. Darius looked up at her, shocked by the naked brutality of her words. Even he, with all his flaws, seemed stunned by the depth of her malice. But I was not stunned. I had seen this coming. I had seen it in the way she looked at my house when she thought I wasn't watching. I wiped my mouth with my napkin and placed it on the table. I did not raise my voice. I did not get angry. I simply looked at her with the cold detachment of a judge passing a sentence. "You call me selfish, Tiffany," I said. "But I am not the one who is planning a vacation with the profits from this house." She froze. "What are you talking about?" she demanded. I reached into my pocket and pulled out my phone. I tapped the screen a few times and then turned it around so they could see. It was a video clip from the security camera I had installed the day I returned. But this wasn't footage of Darius. It was footage from earlier in the week before the trip to Mexico. It showed Tiffany standing on my front porch. She was not alone. She was with Brad, the real estate broker. In the video, they were not discussing square footage or market trends. They were standing very close together. Brad's hand was resting on her lower back in a way that was entirely unprofessional. Tiffany was laughing, leaning into him. The audio was crisp. "Once the old man is gone and Darius signs the papers, we can take the commission and the skim off the top," Brad was saying. "We can go to St. Bart's. Leave Darius to deal with the loan sharks. He won't have the spine to stop us." In the video, Tiffany smiled and kissed him on the cheek. "It is a plan," she said. "Darius is an idiot. He will be so happy the debt is paid he won't even notice we took an extra $50,000 for ourselves." I stopped the video. The silence in the room was absolute. Darius slowly turned his head to look at his wife. His eyes were wide with a new kind of horror. He had accepted that they were criminals together. He had accepted that they were murderers together. But he had not accepted that he was the mark. "You were going to steal from me," Darius whispered. "You were sleeping with Brad." Tiffany's face went pale. She opened her mouth to deny it, but the evidence was glowing on the screen between us. She looked from me to Darius, realizing that her safety net had just been set on fire. I picked up my wine glass and took a sip. "It seems you have bigger problems than my longevity, Darius," I said. "Your wife was not trying to save you. She was trying to liquidate you. You were just the middleman in her transaction." Darius stood up. The fear of the loan sharks was momentarily replaced by the rage of a betrayed husband. He looked at Tiffany with pure loathing. The alliance of greed that had bound them together snapped. They were no longer a team. They were two drowning rats in a barrel, and they were about to start eating each other. I watched them, knowing that a house divided against itself cannot stand, and I was the one who had just kicked out the foundation. The morning sun brought no relief to the house on Chicago's historic district. It only illuminated the wreckage of the previous night. Darius was passed out on the living room sofa, still wearing his clothes from yesterday. He smelled of stale wine and fear. He was catatonic, paralyzed by the deadline the loan sharks had given him. But Tiffany was different. She was a creature of survival. She had not slept. She had spent the night pacing in the guest room, calculating her odds. She realized that Darius was a sinking ship. If he lost a finger or his life, that was his problem. Her problem was money and access. She needed to get back on my good side. She needed to neutralize the threat I posed so she could pivot to her next strategy. I was in the kitchen reading the newspaper and drinking black coffee. I heard her footsteps on the stairs. They were soft, hesitant. She wanted to appear broken. She walked into the kitchen wearing a modest robe, her face scrubbed clean of makeup. Her eyes were red. She looked like a penitent child. She did not look at me at first. She went to the kettle and filled it with water. She moved with a domestic quietness that was jarring after her screaming fit the night before. "I am sorry, Moses." Her voice was a whisper. "I lost my head last night. The stress, the debt, it is destroying us." I said things I did not mean. I turned a page of the newspaper. I did not look up. "Apologies are just words, Tiffany. Intentions are what matter." She nodded vigorously as if agreeing with a wise teacher. "You are right. I know. I want to make it up to you. I want to start over. I found this herbal tea blend in the pantry. It is supposed to be good for the heart. Beatrice used to drink it, didn't she? She dropped the name of my dead wife like a playing card. She was trying to trigger a nostalgic, emotional response. She bustled around the kitchen, getting a mug, getting the honey. The kettle whistled. She poured the water. The steam rose, carrying the scent of hibiscus and mint. She stirred it carefully. Her back was to me, but I watched her reflection in the dark window of the oven. Her hand hovered over her pocket for a fraction of a second before dipping into the mug. It was a subtle movement, a sleight of hand she must have practiced. She turned around holding the steaming mug with both hands, offering it to me like a peace offering. Here, drink this. It will help you relax. We can talk about how to fix this mess with Darius. I want to help you save him. I lowered the newspaper. I looked at her face. She was trying to look sincere, but her eyes were too alert. They were focused on the mug. She was waiting for me to take it. She was holding her breath. I reached out and took the mug. The ceramic was hot against my palms. I brought it close to my face and inhaled. Under the strong scent of mint, there was something else, a faint, acrid smell that did not belong in tea. It smelled like bitter almonds and chemicals. "Thank you, Tiffany," I said. "It is very thoughtful of you to worry about my heart, especially after you spent the last week hoping it would stop beating." She forced a smile. "That is in the past, Moses. Please, drink." I stood up. I held the mug steady. I did not bring it to my lips. Instead, I walked past her toward the bay window in the dining room. On a pedestal stood a large jade plant. It was 40 years old. Beatrice had planted it when we bought the house. It was her pride and joy. It was a symbol of our life together. It was vibrant and green with thick, healthy leaves. Tiffany followed me. "What are you doing?" she asked, her voice edging toward panic. "I am sharing," I said. Beatrice always loved this tea. I tipped the mug. The red liquid poured out onto the soil of the jade plant. It soaked into the earth immediately. The steam rose up through the branches. "Moses, no." Tiffany gasped. She reached out as if to stop me, but it was too late. The mug was empty. I turned to face her. The mug dangled from my finger. "You seem upset, Tiffany. Did you want some?" She stepped back, trembling. "You are wasting it. I made that for you." I reached into the pocket of my robe. I pulled out a folded piece of paper. It was a printout from my secure email server. I unfolded it and held it up. It was a transaction alert from the credit card company. The card was in my name, but I had not used it. "This is a notification from Home Depot," I read aloud. My voice devoid of emotion. "It is dated yesterday afternoon, just 2 hours before you came home. The purchase list is interesting. Gardening gloves, a shovel, and a canister of high-potency rodenticide, the kind that causes internal bleeding, the kind that is tasteless and odorless when mixed with strong flavors." Tiffany's face went gray. She backed away until she hit the dining table. I continued reading. "You bought rat poison, Tiffany, but we do not have rats. We have a very clean house. So I have to ask myself, who is the pest you are trying to exterminate?" She shook her head frantically. "That is not true. I bought it for the garden, for the weeds." I looked at the empty mug, then I looked at the plant. "We will see," I said. "If this tea is as healthy as you say, the plant will thrive. If it is what I think it is, we will know by morning." She ran. She did not say another word. She turned and sprinted up the stairs, locking herself in the guest bedroom. She knew she had failed, and she knew that I knew. She had tried to execute me in my own kitchen, and I had disarmed her with a piece of paper. I did not sleep that night. I sat in the living room watching the jade plant. I apologized to Beatrice in my head. I told her that her plant was a soldier now. It was taking a bullet for me. By dawn, the effects were visible. The thick green leaves had begun to yellow. The stems were drooping. The vibrant life force of the plant was being strangled by the toxins Tiffany had brewed. By noon, the plant was dead. The leaves were brown and shriveled, falling onto the floor like dry rain. The soil smelled sour. It was a heartbreaking sight, but it was also a smoking gun. I took out my phone. I took a high-resolution photo of the dead plant. The withered leaves were a stark contrast to the pristine dining room. Then I took a photo of the Home Depot receipt highlighting the purchase of the poison. I opened the messaging app. I found the group chat titled King Family Updates. It was a chat Tiffany had created years ago to brag about her vacations and expensive dinners. It included Darius. It included me. But most importantly, it included her parents. Her father was a retired judge. Her mother was a socialite who sat on 3 charity boards. They were wealthy white conservatives who valued reputation above all else. They thought Darius was beneath them, but they tolerated him. They thought I was a simple man, but they were polite. They had no idea their daughter was a killer. I composed the message. I attached the photo of the dead plant. I attached the photo of the receipt. I wrote a simple caption. Tiffany made me tea this morning to help with my heart condition. I poured it into Beatrice's favorite plant instead. This is the result 6 hours later. The receipt shows she bought rat poison yesterday. I am alive because I did not drink. I thought you should know what your daughter is capable of when she is desperate for an inheritance. I hit send. The reaction was almost instantaneous. The 3 dots appeared indicating someone was typing. Then my phone began to buzz. It was not a text. It was a call from her father, the judge. I did not answer. I let it ring. I wanted them to sit with the image. I wanted them to look at the dead plant and realize that their daughter was not just a disappointed wife. She was a monster. Upstairs, I heard a scream. It was Tiffany. She must have checked her phone. She must have seen the notification. She realized that I had not just defeated her in private. I had destroyed her in public. I had taken her mask off and shown her parents the predator underneath. She came running down the stairs, her phone clutched in her hand, her face a mask of terror. "What did you do?" she shrieked. "My father is calling me. My mother is texting me asking if I am insane. You ruined me." I stood by the dead plant. I touched a brown leaf and it crumbled into dust. "You ruined yourself, Tiffany," I said calmly. I just turned on the lights. Darius stumbled into the room, rubbed his eyes. He looked at the plant. He looked at his wife. He saw the receipt on the table. He understood. "You tried to poison him," Darius whispered. His voice was full of awe and horror. "You actually tried to kill him right here in the house." Tiffany turned on him, baring her teeth like a cornered animal. "I did it for us, you idiot," she screamed. "We need the money by tonight. The men are coming for your fingers. I was trying to solve the problem while you passed out on the couch." Darius recoiled. He looked at me. He looked at the door. He realized that the enemy was inside the walls. The family was gone. The marriage was gone. All that was left was a group of people waiting for the end, and the end was coming fast. Tiffany did not retreat into shame after the poison incident. She retreated into the digital world where she could control the narrative without the inconvenience of evidence. She knew her parents were furious, but she also knew that if she could paint me as a senile aggressor, she could discredit the photo of the dead plant. She could claim it was a symptom of my dementia, not a proof of her guilt. I sat in the study monitoring her social media feeds on my secure laptop. She had blocked me, but I had cloned her phone access days ago. I watched in real time as she composed her masterpiece of lies. She posted a long, rambling status update on the neighborhood community page. She tagged the local church group. She even tagged the alumni association of my old military unit. The headline was chilling. "Urgent prayer request for our family." She wrote that my mental health had deteriorated rapidly since our trip. She claimed I was suffering from paranoid delusions and violent outbursts. She said I had destroyed the houseplants in a fit of rage and accused her of poisoning me because I no longer recognized her. She painted a picture of a terrified young couple held hostage by a dangerous lunatic. She begged the community for support. She asked for recommendations for secure memory care facilities. The comments began to flood in. Neighbors I had known for 20 years were offering their sympathies. They were sending prayers for Darius and Tiffany. They were calling me a tragedy. It was a brilliant tactical maneuver. She was inoculating the public against the truth. If I went to the police now to report the attempted murder, she would say it was just another delusion. She was weaponizing my age against me. She was using the stereotype of the angry, confused black man to bury the reality of the cold, calculating white woman. Darius sat in the corner watching her type. He looked hopeful for the first time in hours. He thought she had found a loophole. He thought that if they could scream loud enough that I was crazy, nobody would listen when I said they were thieves. They were building a cage of public opinion around me bar by bar. The response to her post was not just digital, it was physical. 40 minutes after she hit publish, I saw the reflection of flashing lights dancing on the living room walls. I looked out the window. A police cruiser had pulled up to the curb. Behind it was a beige sedan with the seal of the Department of Family and Services on the door. Adult Protective Services. Tiffany had not just posted for sympathy. She had made a formal report. She had called the authorities on me, claiming I was an immediate danger to myself and others. Darius and Tiffany rushed out the front door before the officers could even unbuckle their seatbelts. They ran down the walkway, putting on a performance worthy of an Academy Award. Tiffany was crying. She was shaking. She hugged herself as if she were cold or terrified. Darius stood protectively beside her, pointing back at the house, shaking his head with exaggerated sorrow. I watched the neighbors stepping out onto their porches. Mrs. Gable from across the street was watching with her hand over her mouth. Mr. Henderson was shaking his head. They were the audience Tiffany wanted. They were witnessing the tragic scene of the dutiful son dealing with the broken father. The two police officers walked up the path, their hands resting near their holsters. They were cautious. They had been told there was a violent, unstable man inside. The social worker, a stern woman with a clipboard, followed close behind. They were not coming to visit. They were coming to assess and detain. Tiffany was speaking rapidly to the lead officer, gesturing wildly toward the front door. She was telling them I had a knife. She was telling them I had threatened to kill them. She was loading the gun she hoped the police would fire. I stood in the center of the living room. I smoothed my tie. I checked my cufflinks. I was not wearing pajamas. I was not disheveled. I was wearing a charcoal gray suit, a crisp white shirt, and polished shoes. I looked like the man who had negotiated logistics contracts with generals, not a senile geriatric. I walked to the door. I did not wait for them to knock. I did not wait for them to kick it in. I unlocked it and swung it wide open. The tableau on the porch froze. Tiffany stopped mid-sob. Darius looked at his shoes. The police officers looked from the hysterical woman to the composed man standing in the doorway. I did not look angry. I looked disappointed. "Good afternoon, officers," I said, my voice calm and authoritative. "I assume you are here because of the call my daughter-in-law made. Please come in. We can discuss this like civilized adults." The lead officer blinked. This was not the greeting he expected. He stepped inside, his eyes scanning the room for weapons, for signs of struggle, for the chaos Tiffany had described. He saw a pristine living room. He saw the books organized by color on the shelves. He saw the dead plant on the table, but he saw no violence. "Sir," the officer said, "we received a report of a disturbance. We were told you were experiencing a mental health crisis and had threatened your family members with a weapon." I smiled politely. I gestured to the armchair. "Please sit down." "And you as well, madam," I said to the social worker. "I understand you have a job to do. Allegations of dementia are serious. They should be investigated." Tiffany and Darius hovered in the doorway, reluctant to enter the space I controlled. They wanted a scene on the lawn, not a conversation in the parlor. The social worker stepped forward. "Mr. King, I am with APS. We need to ask you some questions to determine your cognitive state. Do you know what year it is? Do you know who the president is?" I looked at her. I did not answer her trivia questions. Instead, I reached for a manila folder resting on the side table. I handed it to her. "I anticipated this visit," I said. "Given my family's recent behavior, I thought it prudent to be prepared. Inside that folder, you will find the results of a comprehensive cognitive and physical evaluation I underwent at the university hospital this morning. I went there immediately after my son tried to sell my house without my permission. You will see that I scored a 30 out of 30 on the mini mental state examination. My blood work is clean. The neurologist's report states I am fully competent and in excellent health." The social worker opened the file. She read the report. She looked at the date. It was today's date. She looked at the doctor's signature. It was a leading specialist in the field. The air went out of her sails instantly. She looked at Tiffany with a mixture of confusion and annoyance. "This report is definitive," she said. "Mr. King is legally competent. There is no evidence of decline. But he is violent." Tiffany shrieked, desperate to salvage the narrative. "He is a master manipulator. He acts normal in public, but behind closed doors, he is a monster. He poured poison on my plant. He threatened to kill us. He has a knife in the kitchen." I turned to the police officer. "Officer, I do have a knife in the kitchen. It is a carving knife. I was making a roast yesterday when my son and his wife broke into my home after abandoning me at an airport in Mexico. But if we are talking about threats and violence, perhaps you should hear this." I took out my phone. I connected it to the Bluetooth speaker system in the living room. I pressed play. The audio was crystal clear. It was the recording from the night before. Tiffany's voice filled the room, shrill and hateful. Why won't you just die? You were supposed to be gone. We left you in Mexico. You are old. You were supposed to have a heart attack." The color drained from the officer's face. He looked at Tiffany, who was now backing away toward the door. The recording continued. Darius's voice joined in, admitting to the debts, admitting to the plan to sell the house. It was not the ranting of a senile man. It was the confession of two predators. I stopped the recording. The silence was heavy. "Officer," I said, "I did not call you because I preferred to handle this family matter privately. But since my daughter-in-law insisted on involving the authorities, I would like to file a formal complaint for filing a false police report and for harassment." The officer turned to face Darius and Tiffany. His hand moved away from his holster. His posture shifted from defensive to aggressive. "Ma'am," he said to Tiffany, his voice hard, "making a false report to APS is a crime. Wasting police resources is a crime. Based on what I just heard and the medical evidence your father-in-law provided, it seems you are the ones causing the disturbance here." "But that recording is out of context," Darius stammered. "Save it," the officer snapped. "If we have to come back to this house tonight, you two are leaving in the back of my car. Do I make myself clear?" "Yes," Tiffany whispered. "Good," the officer said. He turned back to me. "Mr. King, if you need us to remove them, just say the word." I looked at my son and his wife. They were small. They were defeated. "No, officer," I said. "Let them stay. They have packing to do." The police and the social worker left. I walked to the window and watched them talk to the neighbors. I saw the officer shaking his head. I saw the neighbors looking back at my house, not with pity, but with suspicion directed at the young couple. Tiffany's smear campaign had backfired. She had tried to use the system to destroy me, and the system had just validated my sanity. I turned back to the room. Darius and Tiffany had fled upstairs. They were running out of options, and the clock was still ticking on the loan shark's deadline. The night was coming, and they were trapped in a house with a man they could not break, and outside the wolves were gathering. The war arrived at my doorstep at 2 a.m. It did not come with a knock or a phone call. It came with the shattering of glass. A brick wrapped in duct tape crashed through the front bay window of the living room, sending shards flying across the hardwood floor like diamond shrapnel. The sound was explosive in the quiet night. Before the echo had even faded, a second sound followed, the wet slap of paint hitting stone. I walked to the broken window, my feet crunching on the glass. The exterior lights illuminated the front of my brownstone. Red paint dripped down the pristine masonry like a fresh wound. Across the garage door, someone had spray-painted a single word in jagged crimson letters: pay. Darius was screaming. He had been sleeping on the floor of the living room, terrified to leave the ground floor and terrified to stay. He scrambled backward away from the window, covering his head with his arms. He looked like a child waking up from a nightmare, only to realize the monster was real and standing on the lawn. He was hyperventilating. He crawled toward me, grabbing the hem of my robe. His face was wet with tears and snot. "Dad, please," he sobbed. "You have to help me. They are here. They are actually here. They are going to come inside. They are going to cut me up. You have to sell the house. You have to give them the money. Please, Dad. I do not want to die." I looked down at him. I felt nothing. No pity, no fear. Only a cold, clinical detachment. This was the son I had raised. This shivering, weeping mess on the floor was the man who had left me at an airport gate without looking back. He was not crying because he was sorry. He was crying because he was caught. "Stand up, Darius," I said, my voice cutting through his hysteria. "Stop groveling." It is pathetic. He tried to stand, but his legs would not hold him. He slumped against the armchair. "Dad, you do not understand," he gasped. "These men are animals. They do not care about laws. They want their $200,000. If I do not give it to them by tomorrow night, they will kill me. They will kill all of us. Sell the house, please. Just sign the deed over to Brad. He can get the cash. We can pay them. We can be safe." He was still trying to hustle me. Even with death staring him in the face, he was trying to manipulate me into giving up my home. He wanted me to liquidate my sanctuary to pay for his sins. He wanted me to be the sacrifice again. "I am not selling this house, Darius," I said firmly. "Not to Brad. Not to anyone. This is my home. It is the only thing your mother and I built that is still standing pure and uncorrupted. I will not let your mistakes burn it down." Darius let out a wail of despair. "Then I am dead," he cried. "I am dead, and it is your fault. You are hoarding this house like a dragon while your son is slaughtered. How can you be so cruel?" I walked to the fireplace and picked up the brick. It was heavy, cold. I weighed it in my hand. "I am not cruel, son," I said. "I am teaching you a lesson you should have learned 20 years ago. Actions have consequences. But I am not a monster. I do not want you to die. I just refuse to solve your problem by destroying myself." Darius looked up, a flicker of hope igniting in his eyes. "What do you mean?" he asked. I sat down in the armchair opposite him. I placed the brick on the coffee table. It sat there between us, an ugly testament to his failure. "There is another option," I said slowly, letting the words hang in the air. Tiffany appeared at the top of the stairs. She had heard the crash. She was wearing a silk robe, her face pale but her eyes alert. She crept down the steps like a spider descending a web. She sensed a shift in the dynamic. She wanted to be close to the source. "What option?" she asked, her voice sharp. I looked at her, then back at Darius. "Your mother Beatrice was a wise woman," I began. "She knew you, Darius. She knew you had a weakness for easy money and a lack of discipline. She worried about your future. Before she died, she set up a trust fund." Darius's mouth fell open. "A trust fund," he whispered. "Mom left me money." I nodded. "She did. She liquidated her personal investment portfolio, stocks, bonds, inheritance from her own family. She put it all into a blind trust. She made me the executor. She told me to keep it a secret until you were ready, until you were in a desperate situation where you needed a lifeline but had proven you could swim." "How much?" Darius asked. The greed in his voice was instantaneous, replacing the fear. "How much is in it?" I leaned back. "The investments have done well over the last 10 years, I said. "The principal has compounded. Currently, the trust sits at just over $3 million. $3 million. The number seemed to suck the air out of the room. Darius looked like he had been hit with a defibrillator. He sat up straighter. His eyes darted around the room, calculating. $3 million was not just enough to pay the loan sharks. It was enough to start over. It was enough to be rich. "Give it to me," he said. "Give me the access. I can pay the debt. We can fix the window. We can forget all this happened. Dad, please. This saves everything." Tiffany came closer. She stood behind the sofa, her hands gripping the fabric. $3 million, she breathed. I held up a hand. "There are conditions," I said. "Beatrice did not want to fund your vices, Darius. She wanted to fund your success. The trust has a strict stipulation. To unlock the funds, the beneficiary must prove financial responsibility. You must show that you have liquid assets of your own totaling at least $100,000. It is a matching grant of sorts. You show you can save and build, and the trust unlocks to amplify your success." Darius's face fell. It crumbled. $100,000, he whispered. "Dad, I have nothing. I have negative net worth. I have debts. I have $20 in my wallet. I cannot show $100,000. I shrugged. "Then the trust remains locked," I said. "Those are the rules. I cannot change them. It is an ironclad legal document. If you cannot prove you have your own skin in the game, you do not get the windfall." "But I need it now," Darius screamed. "I don't have time to save. I don't have assets." "Then you have a problem," I said coldly, "because I am not selling the house, and I cannot break the trust. You have 24 hours to find $100,000 to unlock $3 million. Or you can explain to your friends outside why you are empty-handed." Darius put his head in his hands and sobbed. He saw the fortune dangling in front of him, tantalizing and unreachable. He saw his salvation and his doom in the same moment. He was broken. He had given up. But Tiffany had not. I watched her from the corner of my eye. She was not looking at Darius. She was looking at me. And then she was looking at the brick. And then she was looking into the middle distance, her eyes narrowing. I could see the gears turning in her mind. She was doing the math. Darius was broke. Darius was a liability. Darius was going to get hurt. But the trust fund was real. I had said it was a blind trust. I had said I was the executor. She licked her lips. She looked at Darius with a sudden cold appraisal. She realized that he was the obstacle. He could not come up with the money. But she came from a family with resources. Her parents were wealthy. She had jewelry. She had connections. If she could get her hands on $100,000, she could potentially unlock the trust. But the trust was for Darius. Unless Darius was not in the picture, or unless she could make a deal with the executor. I saw the moment the idea took root. Her eyes shifted to me, and a slow, predatory smile touched the corners of her mouth. She realized that the condition was a test, and she thought she could cheat on the test. She thought she could outsmart the old man and the loser husband. She walked around the sofa and sat next to Darius. She put a hand on his back. It looked comforting, but I saw her fingers digging into his shirt. "We will figure something out, honey," she said softly. "Don't worry. We just need to think." She looked at me over his slumped shoulder. Her eyes were bright with greed and betrayal. She was already spending the $3 million. She was already planning how to cut the dead weight. She was taking the bait, hook, line, and sinker. I stood up. "I am going to bed," I said. "I suggest you clean up this glass, Darius, and paint over that graffiti. It brings down the property value." I walked up the stairs, leaving them in the wreckage of the living room. I paused on the landing and looked down. Darius was weeping into his hands. Tiffany was staring at the back of his head with the expression of a woman deciding where to bury a body. The seed of destruction had been planted. Now I just had to wait for it to bloom. The grandfather clock in the hallway chimed 2 in the morning. The sound vibrated through the floorboards of my bedroom, a deep, resonant toll that marked the passing of another hour in this house of secrets. I was not asleep. I was sitting in my wingback chair facing the door, a single lamp casting a pool of yellow light onto the open book in my lap. I was waiting. I knew the seed I had planted earlier that evening would germinate in the darkness. Greed is a nocturnal creature, and Tiffany was its most devoted servant. I heard the soft creak of a floorboard outside my door. It was a sound Darius would have missed, but I had spent 30 years listening for the footsteps of men who wanted to kill me. The doorknob turned slowly, the brass mechanism moving with agonizing stealth. The door pushed open a crack, revealing a sliver of the hallway light. Tiffany slipped inside. She was wearing the same silk robe as before, but her demeanor had changed. Gone was the hysterical wife. Gone was the shrieking victim. In her place stood a woman who had done the math and decided to cut her losses. She closed the door behind her and leaned against it, her eyes scanning the room until they landed on me. She did not look ashamed to be caught creeping into her father-in-law's bedroom in the dead of night. She looked determined. "Moses," she whispered. Her voice was steady, devoid of the trembling fear she had displayed downstairs. "We need to talk. Just us. Without Darius." I closed my book and placed it on the side table. I gestured to the chair opposite me. "I have been expecting you, Tiffany. Please sit down." She moved across the room like a cat, silent and predatory. She sat on the edge of the chair, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. She looked at me with a strange intensity, searching my face for weakness. "Darius is useless," she began without preamble. "He is going to get us killed. He does not have the money. He does not have the brains to get the money. He is sitting downstairs crying and drinking your wine, waiting for the men to come and break his legs. I cannot be tied to a sinking ship anymore." I regarded her coolly. "You are his wife, Tiffany. You promised to stay for better or for worse. It seems we have arrived at the worse." She scoffed, a harsh sound in the quiet room. "I married a man with potential. I married a man who told me he was going to inherit a fortune. I did not sign up for loan sharks and bankruptcy. I am young Moses. I have my whole life ahead of me. I cannot let his mistakes drag me down." She leaned forward, her eyes gleaming with avarice. "You said there is a trust fund. $3 million. You said the condition is $100,000 in liquid assets." I nodded. "That is what the document says." "I can get the money," she said, the words tumbling out in a rush. "My parents have a liquidity fund. If I tell them I am leaving Darius, if I tell them he has been abusive and gambling away our future, they will give me the money to start over. They hate him anyway. They have been waiting for me to leave him for years. I leaned back, steepling my fingers. So, you have a plan to save yourself. Why are you telling me this? Why not just take the money and run? Because I want the trust, she hissed. I want the 3 million. If I divorce Darius, I get nothing. But if I help you protect the estate from him, maybe we can come to an arrangement. I raised an eyebrow. An arrangement? Yes. I know you hate him right now. I know you are disgusted by what he did in Mexico. He abandoned you. He left you to die. He does not deserve your money. But I can help you punish him. I can testify. I can tell the police everything about the loan sharks. I can tell them about the fraud he committed with your bank accounts. I can put him away for a long time. She paused, letting the offer hang in the air. She was offering me my son's head on a platter in exchange for a payout, and in return I asked, in return, when the trust unlocks, we split it. You keep half. I take half. $1.5 million. It is enough for me to disappear and start a new life in Europe. You get rid of a leech son, you keep your house, and you keep half the fortune. It is a win-win. I looked at her, marveling at the sheer coldness of her soul. She had moved from attempted murder to betrayal in less than 12 hours. She was willing to send her husband to prison to secure a payday. It is an interesting proposal, I said slowly. But there is a problem, Tiffany. Trust. You tried to poison me this morning. You bought rat poison. Why should I believe you won't take the money and then try to kill me again? Or why should I believe you won't turn around and testify against me to save Darius if the wind changes? She shook her head frantically. No, Moses, you don't understand. The poison was desperation. This is business. I am pragmatic. I know when I am beaten. You beat us. You are smarter than Darius. You are stronger. I bet on the wrong horse. I am correcting my mistake. I will do whatever you want to prove I am on your side. I stood up and walked to my desk. I opened the top drawer and pulled out a yellow legal pad and a pen. I walked back to her and placed them on the small table between us. Words are wind, Tiffany. If you want to make a deal, I need collateral. I need insurance. She looked at the pad, then at me. What do you want me to write? The truth, I said. I want you to write a detailed account of the trip to Mexico. I want you to explain exactly whose idea it was to leave me at the airport. I want you to detail the plan to sell the house. I want you to write down every fraudulent action Darius has taken in the last year, and I want you to sign it. She hesitated, her eyes narrowed. If I write that I am incriminating myself, I am admitting to conspiracy. I shrugged. That is the point. Mutually assured destruction. If you betray me, I hand that paper to the district attorney. If you keep your word, it stays in my safe until the money is transferred. It is your choice. You can walk out of here and wait for the loan sharks to come for Darius, knowing you are next in line. Or you can sign the paper and walk away a millionaire. She stared at the blank yellow page. I could see the gears turning. She was weighing the risk of prison against the certainty of poverty and violence. Greed was winning. It always wins with people like her. She reached out and picked up the pen. Her hand was trembling slightly, not from fear, but from adrenaline. If I do this, she said, her voice low, you promise. Half the trust. I looked her in the eye. I promise that you will get exactly what you deserve. She interpreted that as an agreement. She uncapped the pen and began to write. The scratching sound of the ballpoint against the paper filled the room. I watched her. She wrote furiously, spilling her secrets onto the page. She detailed the conversation where Darius suggested the trip. She described how they tricked me with the power of attorney. She wrote about the moment they walked away from me at the gate. She threw Darius to the wolves, with every sentence painting herself as a reluctant accomplice forced into action by a tyrannical husband. It was a lie of omission, of course. I knew she was the mastermind. But for my purposes, her confession was gold. She wrote for 20 minutes. She filled 3 pages. When she was done, she signed her name at the bottom with a flourish. She dated it. She put the pen down and handed me the pad. There, she said, her chest heaving slightly. It is all there. Every dirty secret. Now we are partners. I took the pad. I read through it quickly. It was perfect. It was a detailed signed confession that corroborated every piece of evidence I had gathered. It was a death warrant for their freedom. I folded the pad and placed it in the pocket of my robe. I looked at her. A smile touched my lips. It was the smile of a general who had just watched the enemy army surrender without firing a shot. "Thank you, Tiffany," I said. "You have been very helpful. You should go get some sleep. Tomorrow is going to be a very busy day. We have a lot of arrangements to make." She stood up, looking relieved, almost giddy. She smoothed her robe. "Thank you, Moses. You won't regret this. We are going to be a great team." She turned and walked to the door. She paused with her hand on the knob and looked back. "Do not tell Darius," she whispered. "Not until we have the money." "I won't tell him a thing," I assured her. She slipped out into the hallway, closing the door softly behind her. I listened to her footsteps fade away. I took the pad out of my pocket and looked at it again. I walked to my desk and locked it in the portable safe I kept there. Partners. The word tasted like ash. She thought she had bought her freedom. She thought she had outsmarted the devil. She had no idea that she had just signed her own confession. She had given me the final weapon I needed to destroy them both. The trap was sprung, the cage door was closed, and tomorrow I would turn the key. The gathering in my living room had the tension of a tribunal before a verdict. I had arranged the seating with strategic precision. On the velvet sofa sat Tiffany's parents, Robert and Catherine. They were old money conservatives who wore their wealth like armor. They looked uncomfortable sitting in my home, their eyes darting around, judging the furniture, judging the neighborhood, and most of all, judging me. To them, I was just the black father-in-law their daughter had unfortunately acquired along with a disappointing husband. Next to them sat Tiffany. She was vibrating with anticipation. She clutched her purse tight, her knuckles white. She believed this was the moment of her liberation. She thought we were here to sign the papers that would unlock the trust fund and give her the millions she had bargained for. Across from them sat Darius. He looked like a man walking to the gallows. He had dark circles under his eyes. He was sweating. He kept checking his watch, terrified that the loan sharks would arrive before the money did. And in the corner sat Mr. Roth, my attorney. He was a man of few words and sharp suits. He had the documents spread out on the coffee table. I stood by the fireplace. I commanded the room not with volume, but with silence. I waited until everyone was settled, until the discomfort was palpable. Robert cleared his throat. He looked at his watch. "We are busy people, Moses," he said, his tone dismissive. "Tiffany said this was an emergency regarding family finances. Can we get on with it? We have a luncheon at the club at 1. I looked at him. I saw where Tiffany got her arrogance. It was genetic. "We will get on with it, Robert," I said, my voice steady. "We are here to discuss the future of your daughter and my son, and we are here to discuss an inheritance." Darius perked up. He leaned forward, his eyes desperate. "Is it the trust, Dad? Did you find a way to unlock it?" I nodded slowly. "I did, but before we sign anything, we need to establish the truth of the situation. We need to understand exactly how we got here." Tiffany smiled. It was a small, conspiratorial smile directed at me. She thought I was about to expose Darius's debts and cut him out, leaving her as the beneficiary. She thought we were partners. "Mr. Roth," I said, "please read the statement." Mr. Roth picked up the yellow legal pad I had given him. It was the confession Tiffany had written the night before. He adjusted his glasses. He began to read. His voice was dry and professional, which made the words even more damning. "I, Tiffany King, hereby admit to conspiring with my husband Darius King to abandon Moses King at Benito Juarez International Airport in Mexico City on October 15th. The purpose of this abandonment was to facilitate the unauthorized sale of his primary residence in Chicago." The room went dead silent. Robert and Catherine froze. Their mouths hung open. Darius turned his head slowly to look at his wife. Tiffany's smile vanished. Her skin turned the color of ash. She stood up, her chair scraping loudly against the floor. "Wait," she stammered. "That was private. You said that was for insurance." Mr. Roth continued reading, ignoring her. "We plan to use a fraudulent power of attorney to list the property. We believe that Mr. King would be detained by Mexican authorities or succumb to his heart condition due to lack of medication, which we deliberately removed from his bag." Robert stood up. His face was purple. "Tiffany, is this true?" he demanded. Did you write this? Tiffany looked around the room like a trapped animal. She looked at me, her eyes filled with betrayal. You promised, she screamed. You said if I wrote it down, we would split the money. You said we were partners. I looked at her coldly. I lied, Tiffany, just like you lied when you said you loved my son, just like you lied when you said you loved me. Darius let out a sound that was half sob, half roar. He stood up, his hands clenched into fists. He looked at Tiffany. You wrote that, he asked, his voice shaking with rage. You told him everything. You sold me out. Mr. Roth read the final paragraph. Furthermore, I admit that Darius King has engaged in identity theft and bank fraud using his father's accounts to pay gambling debts. I am providing this testimony in exchange for financial consideration and immunity from prosecution. That was the spark. Darius snapped. The pressure of the loan sharks, the fear of death, and now the absolute betrayal by his wife broke his mind. He lunged across the coffee table. He did not care about her parents. He did not care about the lawyer. He grabbed Tiffany by the throat and tackled her onto the sofa. You traitor, he screamed, spitting in her face. You were the one who said to leave him. It was your idea. You said he was a useless old man. Robert and Catherine screamed. They tried to pull Darius off their daughter, but he was possessed by a demon of pure fury. He struck her. He hit her with the open palm of his hand, the sound cracking through the room like a gunshot. You ruined us, Darius yelled. I am going to die because of you. The chaos was absolute. Tiffany was screaming, scratching at Darius's face. Her parents were shouting for help, looking at me with horror, expecting me to intervene, expecting me to save them from the violence their own entitlement had bred. I did not move. I stood by the fireplace watching them destroy each other. I took a sip of my tea. Earl Grey. Hot. It was delicious. I felt a profound sense of detachment. These people were not my family. They were a nest of vipers biting their own tails. I watched Darius strike her again. I watched Robert try to hit Darius with his cane. It was ugly. It was violent. And it was exactly what they deserved. They had spent years hurting me in secret. Now they were hurting each other in public. Mr. Roth looked at me, his eyebrows raised. He was asking if it was time. I nodded. I set my teacup down on the mantelpiece. I walked to the window and pulled back the curtain. Outside, a black van was idling at the curb. Mateo was in the driver's seat. He saw my signal. He flashed the headlights once. I turned back to the room. Back to Wasuit. Enough, I said. My voice was not loud, but it carried the weight of command. Darius stopped, his fist raised. He looked at me panting. His face was scratched and bleeding. Tiffany was sobbing on the sofa, holding her bruised cheek. Her parents were huddled around her, looking at me with hatred. You are a monster, Robert spat at me. You let this happen. You set them up. I looked at him. I set nothing up, I said. I simply placed a mirror in the room. You do not like what you see. There was a heavy pounding on the front door. It was not a polite knock. It was the authoritative hammer of law enforcement. Darius froze. He looked at the door. He looked at me. Who is that? He whispered. I picked up my tea again. I believe that is the consequence of your actions, son, I said. The door burst open. Mateo had unlocked it from the outside. 6 police officers in tactical gear stormed into the hallway. They did not ask questions. They had the warrants. They had the evidence. They had the confession. Police! Everyone on the ground, a sergeant shouted, leveling his weapon at Darius. Darius raised his hands slowly, his eyes filling with tears. He looked at me one last time. He looked for the father who used to catch him when he fell. He looked for the man who had bailed him out of every mistake he had ever made. He did not find that man. He found Moses King. And Moses King was done making deals. Officers, I said, pointing at the group on the sofa. The man is Darius King. He is wanted for fraud and financial crimes. The woman is Tiffany King. She is wanted for conspiracy to commit murder and elder abuse. And here is the written confession, signed and dated. I handed the yellow pad to the sergeant. He glanced at it and nodded. He motioned to his men. They moved in. They grabbed Darius and forced him to the floor. They grabbed Tiffany, who was screaming that she had immunity, that she had a deal. You have the right to remain silent, the sergeant recited as he clicked the handcuffs onto Darius's wrists. I watched them being dragged out of my house. I watched Tiffany's parents trying to argue with the police, waving their influence around like a dull sword. They were ignored. The law does not care about your country club membership when your daughter confesses to attempted murder on paper. As they dragged Darius past me, he stopped struggling. He looked at me with dead eyes. "You planned this," he whispered. "You planned it all." I looked him in the eye. "No, Darius," I said. "I just finished what you started." They took them away. The door closed. The sirens wailed in the distance, fading as they drove toward the precinct. The room was quiet again. The furniture was overturned. There was blood on the carpet, but the air was clean. The poison was gone. Mr. Roth packed up his papers. He looked at me with professional admiration. "That was effective, Mr. King," he said. "It was necessary," I replied. I walked to the kitchen and poured the rest of the tea down the sink. The family meeting was adjourned. The verdict had been delivered, and now it was time for the sentencing. The sound of steel ratchet cuffs tightening around my son's wrists was the loudest noise in the room. It cut through the screams and the protests like a gavel strike. Darius was on his knees, his face pressed against the Persian rug he had planned to rip out. He was not fighting the officers physically, but he was fighting the reality of his situation with a desperate stream of words. He babbled about misunderstandings and family disputes. He tried to tell the sergeant that this was a civil matter. But the sergeant was not listening. He was reading Darius his rights with a monotone efficiency that signaled the end of the road. "You are under arrest for bank fraud, identity theft, and conspiracy to commit financial crimes," the officer stated. "We also have a warrant regarding your involvement with illegal lending operations and money laundering." Darius looked up at me. His eyes were wide and wet with terror. "Dad, tell them," he pleaded. "Tell them I am your son. Tell them this is a mistake. You cannot let them take me. The loan sharks will find me in jail. They will kill me in holding." I looked down at him. I did not see my son. I saw a stranger who had worn my son's face while stealing my life savings. "You should have thought about that before you signed my name on those loan applications, Darius," I said. "You dug this hole. Now you have to live in it." Across the room, Tiffany was putting up a different kind of fight. She was not begging. She was negotiating. As the female officer pulled her arms behind her back, Tiffany twisted and shouted at Mr. Roth. "I have immunity," she shrieked. "I signed the confession. We had a deal. You said if I wrote it down, I would be a partner. You cannot arrest me. I am the witness, Mr. Roth adjusted his glasses and looked at her with professional disdain. "You confess to conspiracy to commit murder and elder abuse, Mrs. King. There is no immunity deal for attempted homicide. That document was not a plea bargain. It was evidence, and now it is the primary exhibit in the case against you." Her parents, Robert and Catherine, stood by the window, huddled together like survivors of a shipwreck. They did not try to intervene. They watched their daughter being handcuffed with a mixture of horror and self-preservation. They realized that any association with her now would drag their reputation into the mud along with hers. They were already distancing themselves, their eyes cold and hard. The officers hauled Darius and Tiffany to their feet. They stood side by side in the center of the living room, the wreckage of their marriage and their schemes surrounding them. The physical fight was over, but the psychological war had one final battle left. Darius looked around the room, his gaze landing on the walls, on the ceiling, on the structure of the house itself. A sudden frantic clarity entered his eyes. He realized he was going to prison. He realized his life was over, but his greed, his deep entitlement survived even in the face of incarceration. "Wait!" Darius shouted, struggling against the grip of the officer. "Wait 1 minute. You can arrest me. You can put me in jail, but you cannot take this house." He turned his head to look at me, his face twisted into a sneer of desperate victory. "You think you won, Dad. You think you beat us, but I know the law. I am your only child. When you die, this house comes to me. Even if I am in prison, I inherit it. It is my birthright. I will sell it from my cell. I will use the money to pay for the best lawyers in the country. I will get out on appeal, and I will come back here and I will piss on your grave." He was laughing now, a manic, unhinged sound. He thought he had found the ultimate trump card. He thought that no matter what happened today, biology and inheritance laws would eventually grant him the prize he had committed crimes to obtain. Tiffany looked up, catching on to his thread of hope. That is right, she spat. We are next of kin. You cannot cut us out completely. The state laws protect us. We will get this house eventually, Moses, and when we do, we will burn it to the ground just to spite you. I looked at Mr. Roth. The lawyer nodded. He reached into his briefcase and pulled out one final document. It was not a yellow legal pad this time. It was a thick-bound contract with a government seal on the cover. He walked over to where Darius and Tiffany were being held. He held the document up so they could read the title page. I am afraid you are mistaken, Mr. Kingroth said, his voice calm and dry. You seem to be operating under the assumption that your father owns this property. Darius frowned. Of course he owns it. He bought it 40 years ago. It is paid off. I saw the deed in the safe. Mr. Roth shook his head. You saw a copy of the original deed. You did not see the transfer of title. Transfer, Darius whispered. 5 years ago, Mr. Roth explained, Moses King entered into a life estate agreement. He sold the entire property to the Veterans Housing Charity. He donated the equity to build homes for disabled soldiers. The room went silent. Even the police officers seemed to pause, listening to the revelation. Darius shook his head violently. No, that is a lie. He lives here. It is his house. It is not his asset, Roth corrected. Under the terms of the life estate, Moses retains the right to inhabit the property for the duration of his natural life. He pays the utilities and the taxes. But at the moment his heart stops, the moment he passes away, the property reverts instantly and fully to the charity. It does not go into probate. It does not go to his heirs. It bypasses you completely. I stepped forward. I wanted them to see my face when they understood. I sold it. Darius, I said, 5 years ago when you stole the first $5,000 from my checking account. I realized then that you were waiting for me to die so you could cash out. I decided to remove the temptation. I sold the house for $1 to the charity. I gave it away to men who actually understand the meaning of honor. Darius looked as if he had been shot in the stomach. He slumped in the officer's grip, his legs giving out. All the air left his lungs in a long, wheezing gasp. You gave it away, he choked out. You gave away my inheritance. It was never your inheritance, I replied. It was my home, and I chose to leave it to people who would respect it. Tiffany let out a low keen of agony. She stared at me, her eyes wide with the realization of the magnitude of their failure. We did all this for nothing, she whispered. The trip to Mexico, the poison, the lawyers, the fraud. We committed crimes for a house you do not even own. Exactly, I said. You tried to kill me for an asset that has not belonged to me in half a decade. If you had succeeded in Mexico, if I had died on that bench, you would have come home to find the locks changed by the charity directors within 24 hours. You would have been homeless anyway. The weight of that truth crushed them. It was heavier than the handcuffs. It was heavier than the prison sentence waiting for them. It was the crushing weight of absolute futility. They had destroyed their lives, they had destroyed their souls, and they had destroyed their freedom chasing a ghost. There was no pot of gold at the end of their rainbow. There was only a donation receipt. Darius began to laugh again, but this time it was the sound of a broken mind. He laughed until he choked, until snot ran down his face. He looked at Tiffany. We killed Richard, he mumbled. We killed him for money, and there is no money. Whatever secrets they had buried in the past, whatever crimes they had committed before this week, were all for a payout that never existed. The irony was absolute. Get them out of here, I said, turning my back on them. I am tired. The officers pushed them toward the door. Darius dragged his feet, his eyes fixed on the floor, unable to look at the house he had coveted for so long. Tiffany was silent, her face a mask of shock. Her parents followed the police out, terrified and ashamed, scurrying like rats fleeing a sinking ship. I heard the front door close. I heard the heavy lock click into place. I heard the sirens fade into the night. I stood in the middle of my living room. It was messy, it was battered, but it was mine for as long as I drew breath. And after that, it would belong to heroes. Mr. Roth snapped his briefcase shut. He looked at me. You played a long game, Moses, he said. I looked at the empty doorway. I played the only game that matters, I said. I played for my dignity. I walked to the window and watched the flashing lights disappear down the street. My son was gone. My daughter-in-law was gone. The threats were gone. I was alone. But for the first time in years, I did not feel lonely. I felt clean. I felt safe. I had cut out the rot, and tomorrow I would start the rest of my life. The courtroom smelled of lemon polish and stale anxiety. It was a scent I knew well from my years in logistics negotiating contracts in government buildings, but today it felt different. Today it was the scent of closure. I sat on the witness stand, my back straight, my hands resting calmly on the wooden rail. I was wearing my best suit, the one I used to wear to board meetings. I wanted the jury to see me not as a victim, but as a man of substance. Across the room, Darius sat at the defense table. He was wearing an orange jumpsuit that washed out his complexion. He looked small. He looked young. For a fleeting second, I remembered the boy I had taught to ride a bike. I remembered the teenager I had bailed out of trouble in high school. I remembered the son I had loved. But then I looked at his eyes. They were shifting nervously, scanning the room for an exit that did not exist. They were the eyes of the man who had left me at an airport gate with nothing but a bottle of water and a death sentence. The memory of the cold metal bench in Mexico City washed over me, hardening my heart into stone. The prosecutor asked me to recount the events of October 15th. I did so with clinical precision. I described the trip. I described the theft of my medication. I described the note Tiffany had left in my bag. The jury listened in silence. I saw a woman in the front row wipe a tear from her eye. I saw a man in the back shake his head in disgust. The defense attorney tried to paint me as a vindictive father punishing a son for a financial mistake. He asked if I had set a trap with the trust fund. I looked him dead in the eye. I did not set a trap, I replied, my voice projecting to the back of the room. I offered a lifeline. My son chose to use it as a noose. I turned my gaze to Darius. He tried to meet my eyes. He tried to summon a look of remorse, hoping to spark that old paternal instinct to protect him. I gave him nothing. No anger, no sadness, no pity. I looked at him with the same cold detachment I would use to inspect a broken piece of machinery. He flinched. He realized in that moment that the well had run dry. He realized that Moses King the father was gone, and only Moses King the witness remained. The sentencing hearing took place 2 weeks later. The judge was a stern woman with gray hair and a reputation for harsh sentences in cases of elder abuse. She had read the reports. She had heard the recordings. She had seen the confession Tiffany wrote. She looked at the two defendants standing before her with undisguised contempt. Darius King and Tiffany King. She began, her voice echoing through the silent courtroom. You stand convicted of conspiracy to commit murder, elder abuse, bank fraud, and identity theft. Your actions were not impulsive. They were calculated, cold, and cruel. You attempted to discard a human life for financial gain. You treated a father like an expired asset. Darius was trembling. He gripped the edge of the table, his knuckles white. Tiffany stood rigid, her face a mask of porcelain fragility that fooled no one. The judge continued. Perhaps the most tragic aspect of this case is the futility of your crimes. You destroyed your lives and the life of your family for an inheritance that did not exist. You committed evil for a house that was already owned by a charity. Greed did not just corrupt you, it made you fools. She banged her gavel. I sentence you both to 20 years in a federal correctional institution without the possibility of parole for the first 15 years. The scream that tore from Tiffany's throat was primal. She did not look at the judge. She turned on Darius. She lunged at him, her manicured nails aiming for his eyes. You did this, she shrieked. You and your stupid gambling debts. You dragged me into this. I could have divorced you. I could have been free. You ruined my life. The bailiffs moved in instantly. They grabbed Tiffany, dragging her away from Darius. She kicked and screamed, cursing him, cursing me, cursing the world. Darius did not fight back. He stood there taking her abuse, his head hanging low. He looked completely broken. The partnership of greed had dissolved into violence and hatred. They were being dragged away to separate prisons to live separate miseries, blaming each other for eternity. I watched them go. I did not feel triumph. I felt a heavy, quiet relief. The cancer had been cut out. 1 month later, I drove to the state penitentiary. It was a gray concrete fortress surrounded by razor wire. It was a place where hope went to die. I sat in the visiting room on a metal stool waiting. I needed to do this one last time. I needed to close the door firmly and lock it. Darius walked in. He looked thinner. His head was shaved. He sat down on the other side of the thick glass partition. He picked up the black phone receiver. I picked up mine. "Hi, Dad," he whispered. His voice was rough. "Hello, Darius," I said. Tears welled up in his eyes. "Dad, I am so sorry. I know I messed up. I know I deserve this. But it is hard in here. I am scared. Please, can you put some money in my commissary account? I just need some basics. Soap, toothpaste. Please, Dad. I am your son." Even in prison, even after everything, he was still asking for money. He was still the leech looking for a vein. He had learned nothing. I looked at him through the scratched glass. I leaned forward. "I did not come here to give you money, Darius. I came here to tell you something so you would never have to wonder." He sniffled, wiping his nose with the back of his hand. What he asked, hopeful. "I forgive the boy I raised," I said, my voice steady. "I forgive the child who scraped his knee and cried for his mother. But that child is dead. You killed him the day you left me in Mexico. The man sitting in front of me is a stranger. He is a criminal. And I do not have a criminal for a son." Darius's face crumpled. "Dad, please don't say that. I am not your father anymore," I said. "I am just the man who survived you. Do not write to me. Do not call me. If you send letters, I will burn them. You wanted my house, Darius. Now you have a house. It has bars on the windows and guards at the door. It is exactly what you earned." I hung up the phone. I did not wait for him to respond. I stood up and walked toward the exit. I could hear him tapping on the glass behind me, shouting muffled words, but I did not turn around. I walked out of the prison into the bright sunlight. The air tasted sweet. I got into my car and drove away, leaving the past in the rearview mirror where it belonged. The Atlantic Ocean is different from Lake Michigan. It moves with a deeper rhythm, a slower pulse that seems to measure time not in minutes but in lifetimes. I sit on the terrace of my villa in the Algarve, watching the sun dip below the horizon, turning the water into a sheet of hammered copper. The air smells of salt and grilled sardines, a far cry from the exhaust fumes of Chicago. It has been 1 year since I walked out of that prison. 1 year since I sold the remaining furniture, packed 3 suitcases, and left the United States behind. My life here is simple. I wake up when the sun hits my window. I walk to the local market to buy fresh bread and cheese. I speak Portuguese with the fishermen, a language I picked up during a deployment in Angola 40 years ago and dusted off with surprising ease. They know me as Senor Moses, the quiet American who tips well and plays a fierce game of chess. They do not know about the son who tried to kill me. They do not know about the house that was a trap. Here I am, just a man, enjoying the sunset of his life. I picked up the glass of Vinho Verde from the table. The condensation was cool against my fingers. I took a sip, letting the crisp acidity wash away the dust of the afternoon. The villa is modest but beautiful. White stucco walls, terracotta tiles, a garden full of lemon trees and bougainvillea. It is everything I ever wanted, and everything Darius tried to steal. The irony is not lost on me. He wanted a quick fortune to live a life of leisure. Instead, his greed bought him a cage, while my patience bought me paradise. The sound of footsteps on the gravel path interrupted my thoughts. It was the postman, a cheerful young man named João. He waved a white envelope in the air. "Mail for you, Senor Moses," he called out. "From America." I thanked him and took the letter. I recognized the return address immediately. It was stamped with the seal of the federal penitentiary. The handwriting was jagged, desperate. It was Darius. I sat back down in my chair. I did not open it immediately. I held it up to the dying light. I could feel the weight of his pleading through the paper. He was likely asking for money again. Or perhaps he was trying to apologize, spinning new lies to manipulate an old man he thought might have softened with time and distance. He did not know that the Atlantic Ocean is wide, but not wide enough to make me forget the feeling of that cold metal bench in Mexico City. I did not need to read it to know what it said. It would be a litany of complaints. The food is bad. The guards are mean. I am lonely. It was the song of a man who still believed the world owed him something. He was still trying to extract value from me, even from behind bars. He was a ghost haunting a house I had already burned down. I tore the letter in half, then in quarters. The sound of ripping paper was satisfying final. I stood up and walked to the edge of the terrace. The wind was picking up, blowing in from the sea. I opened my hand and let the pieces of paper fall. They swirled in the air for a moment, white confetti against the darkening sky, before being carried away over the cliffs and down into the churning water below. The ocean swallowed his words without a sound. Mateo walked onto the terrace carrying a tray of olives and cheese. He had joined me 6 months ago. He had sold his auto shop in Mexico City and retired. We were two old soldiers living out our days in peace, watching each other's backs. He saw me standing at the rail looking down at the water. He saw the empty space in my hand where the letter had been. He did not ask. He knew. "Trash day," Mateo asked, setting the tray down. I turned to him and smiled. It was a genuine smile, free of the bitterness that had poisoned me for so long. "Yes," I said, "just taking out the last of the garbage." Mateo poured himself a glass of wine. He raised it in a toast. "To retirement," he said. I clinked my glass against his. "To freedom," I corrected. I looked out at the horizon one last time. The sun was gone now, leaving behind a purple bruise on the sky. The first stars were beginning to appear. I thought about Beatrice. I thought about the life we had built. I thought about the son we had tried to raise. I felt a pang of sadness for the boy who died, but no pity for the man who remained. I had learned the hardest lesson a parent can learn. You cannot save someone who is determined to drown. You can only save yourself. I took a deep breath of the salty air. I was 72 years old. I was alone in a foreign country. I had no family left, and I had never been happier. I turned my back on the ocean and sat down with my friend. The night was warm, the wine was good, and for the first time in my life, I belonged entirely to myself. We spend decades building safety nets for the people we love, often forgetting to weave one for ourselves. My journey is a stark reminder that biology does not guarantee loyalty and sacrifice does not guarantee gratitude. The hardest truth I ever faced was not that my son abandoned me, but that I had to abandon him to save my own soul. True peace comes only when we stop feeding the parasites in our lives, even if they share our last name. It is never too late to reclaim your dignity, rewrite your ending, and finally become the protagonist of your own life. If my story resonated with you, please hit the like button and subscribe to the channel for more tales of justice and redemption. Let me know in the comments, have you ever had to cut a toxic family member out of your life to save yourself?